Hey YouTube, welcome to Rampage Reviews. I'm Rampage, and in today's video, I'm going to show you just how...
That business on Cato Neimodia doesn't count.
Let's dive in, shall we? So in today's video, we're going to talk about Brotherhood. It is a book written by Mike Chen, and it takes place in year 22 BBY. And this book, at the beginning, Anakin is knighted, so he earns his rank of Jedi Knight, and this is shortly after the events of Episode 2. It's actually right after the first Battle of Geonosis. Anakin, this is when he earns his knighthood. I would have thought it would happen maybe further down the line after that, but I suppose his talent earned him that spot. And we don't really know the events that led to him earning that spot, except for maybe what happened during the Battle of Geonosis, and also him fighting Count Dooku, even though he lost his arm. Maybe they felt that was enough of an experience to knight him, but we don't know those specifics yet. But I like the book. It was interesting. There's a little side story within it about a conflicted Jedi that is kind of relative to Anakin. So there's definitely some good growth within this book that you see between Anakin and Obi Wan, because this is the story of how they go from feeling that master and Padawan vibe to Jedi Knight and Jedi Knight, them fighting on equal footing with each other and respecting each other on equal footing. So with that, I definitely respected the story, and I enjoyed seeing them grow within the story. So before I go any further, I just wanted to remind everybody that there will be links in the description for this book and the next 3 books that I'll be reading. Just keep in mind that these links are Amazon links, and I am an Amazon affiliate. So if you use these links to purchase the books, it will benefit me or the channel in some way, but don't do it to benefit me. Do it to continue this conversation, because I love the debate, and there's always new ideas we can explore when we discuss together. And also, it gives you a chance to correct me if you want to shoot it in the comments. And also, make sure if you enjoyed the content today to like the video and subscribe to the channel. When you like the video, it really helps the algorithm out, so we can get this in front of more eyes and continue the conversation in an even bigger fashion. So I'd appreciate it if you did that. So the book is about that business on Cato Neimodia. Well, Cato Neimodia is a neutral party during the Clone Wars at this time, and both the Republic and the Separatists are trying to vie for their support. In the midst of that, Cato Neimodia actually gets attacked by a large explosion, and the Republic is kind of implicated. Although, against the initial wishes of the Chancellor, Obi Wan is selected to go to Cato Neimodia alone and diplomatically argue on the behalf of the Republic. The Chancellor wanted to do it with a group of clone troopers, but Obi Wan thought that that would look like threatening, so he figured if he went by himself, he would be in an official capacity of the Republic, and he felt like, even though he's in hostile territory somewhat because of the Republic's implication of this attack, that maybe they wouldn't view him as hostile since it's just himself. And he's also willing to not give up his lightsaber, but comply with any demands that they have while he's there within reason. So he's there to conduct an investigation to make sure the Republic can be vindicated. And Asajj Ventress is on the planet as well, and she is in the ear of the Cato Neimoidian government, trying to keep that implication of the Republic alive, so that way they can try to argue them towards the Separatists. And throughout the book, you see Obi-Wan trying to look for areas where he can vindicate the Republic, and eventually he does find some evidence that actually implicates the Republic. He doesn't share it with the Neimoidian government immediately because he wants to be completely sure that it's real. He brought a communicator with him that had a secure channel to Anakin, and he was asked by the Neimoidian government not to bring any communication device because they wanted to know that he was completely genuine and not calling for any sort of help from the Republic in case he was going to bring someone to further an attack. He wanted to seem gracious and diplomatic, so he agreed to that, except for he brought this little communicator that was just a secure channel just to Anakin, and he was actually asked not to have one to the Chancellor or to the Jedi Council, which Anakin wasn't on the Jedi Council, so he felt like he was following the rules, or at least Anakin convinced him of that. So he sent this data that he found to Anakin to give to Dex, which is a friend of his from Episode 2, and to determine if it is real. Ultimately, they find out it is real. He's confused. He's like, there's no way it can be real. He's not convinced, and he wants to conduct a further investigation to make sure. The Neimoidian government finds out that he has it and is keeping it from them in an effort to extend his investigation, and they think he's being dishonest, and that he just wants to try to hide the fact that the Republic was involved and try to implicate the Separatists. Well, that puts him on trial with the Neimoidian government. Ventress is still in their ear, trying to let them know that he's dishonest, he's untrustworthy, and Obi-Wan has a plan to get out of this. He does have a little speech prepared to talk to the Neimoidian government, and he wants to do it diplomatically, but he knows that he can get out of there if he needs to get out of there physically. Anakin finds out that he's in trouble, and Anakin is on this other mission that involves a bunch of younglings. This is that side story I was talking about with the young girl youngling who's an Iridonian Zabrak, and she's highly sensitive to the pain of war surrounding her during the Clone Wars, and it's overwhelming her. She doesn't want to connect to the Force because pain is all too real and too overwhelming. So Anakin's trying to discuss with her throughout the book, trying to relate to her to help her understand her place within the Jedi and with her connection to the Force. When Anakin finds out that Obi-Wan is in trouble, I think he finds out via his communicator because Asajj Ventress finds it, and then he hears her over it, and when he hears her, he realizes, oh, his communicator was found, so he feels like he's got to go help him. This would be that point where Obi-Wan didn't believe that this business counted because he had a way out, but Anakin Anakin jumped in to help him anyway, and he does. He jumps in, lightsabers blazing. They have to fight their way out, which they do with the help of a ex-Neimoidian military person who is respected, but they believe she might be helping Obi Wan at this point, and she's kind of being viewed as a traitor, but she has to convince them of her innocence as well, that she is loyal to the Neimoidians, but she understands that when you want to find the truth, you really have to keep digging and make completely sure that it is the truth. And her name was Roog, but she helps them out. They escape. Roog is actually taken in as a political prisoner, and Obi-Wan and Anakin find her and is able to release her as well and get her out of there until, I imagine, until she can be vindicated as well. They try to forward this information to the Cato Neimoidian government about the Republic's innocence because actually, and I skipped this before, but Obi-Wan also found evidence that was implicating the Separatists, and he deduced that there was a third party involved, which we all know is Sidious at this point, but they don't know that. So he reveals this information during his trial, but he's got further convincing to do down the road. You've heard the things I kind of like about the book. You've heard the overview of the book. Now we're going to find out the things that I found interesting about this book. After that Battle of Geonosis, the Jedi Council actually goes through several rotations of people to rotate into the High Council seats and out of it due to deaths of other members during the Battle of Geonosis and also deaths of potential people that could have been selected as permanent members. This is really how Obi-Wan is able to secure his spot as a permanent member on the Jedi Council, but it also just points to how chaotic that time was for the Jedi because they had no stability within the High Council. Amidst all of that and within the coming years until Order 66 and stuff like that, this was just another step in the setup for Darth Sidious. Anakin would act a bit too obvious about his feelings towards Padme in this book, and everyone notices it right away. The thing is, Anakin's feelings would just stretch out way too strongly, and he didn't really hide it enough, and Obi-Wan is able to sense it a lot of the times, especially when they were together and when they would talk to each other. And I don't know if Anakin knew this, if he didn't care, or if he just didn't realize that his feelings were that obvious to at least his former master and maybe other Jedi around him. Obi-Wan knew very early on about Anakin's at least alleged relationship, and he knows all of this well before episode 3. In Obi-Wan's quest to fulfill Qui-Gon's last request, which was to train Anakin because he is the chosen one, Obi-Wan regrets that his biggest mistake was not being able to quell Anakin's biggest fault as a Jedi, which was his passion, and that passion can lead to some strong feelings, which leads to the dark side. Obi-Wan always regretted that he just couldn't quell that, but early on as well, Anakin just showed signs of that, and I think Obi-Wan thought maybe he would just get over it, but he was just never able to do that. Duchess of Mandalore Satine had a nickname for Obi-Wan Kenobi, and that was Ben, which makes complete sense why he named himself Ben when he went to Tatooine to look over Luke. And we find that out in the book when he's talking to Dex, and Dex mentions that Satine is doing a speech and calls Satine Obi-Wan's old friend, and Obi-Wan's like, what old friend? And then he describes her and then says, used to call you Ben for some reason, and he's trying to just brush it off and doesn't know what he's talking about. Weird nickname for him to get. I don't know where that would have even came from, but if there's another reason that he named himself Ben that you know of or have heard in the past, make sure to leave it in the comments. Obi-Wan was always more well-suited to be a council member than Qui-Gon Jinn, and the more you read some of these books, the more you realize it. Obi-Wan was just always by the book, principled towards the Jedi Code, the Jedi Council, loyal to the Republic, and Qui-Gon was loyal to one thing, the Force. He served the Force, and he was a servant of the Force, and he was willing to defy just about anybody to make sure that he was a good servant for the Force, and that included not taking a seat on the Jedi Council because he just didn't believe that suited him because his ideas and actions could be very unorthodox, something that the Jedi wouldn't always approve of. They might have felt he was impulsive with some of these decisions. Did Obi-Wan at any point think that Dooku was the Sith Lord that they were looking for? Because they had this sneaking feeling that the dark side surrounded everything, and especially because they know that the death of Darth Maul led them to be looking for a Sith Lord, a master. They had to find somebody who would fit that description, and with Dooku's actions, that would be an easy scapegoat. But it's really ambiguous about whether Dooku was a Sith or whether he was just somebody who left the Jedi who turned to the dark side, so Dark Jedi basically. Because in episode 2, he says he wants Obi-Wan to join him and destroy the Sith, and then in episode 3, you feel like he is part of the Sith, and in this book, Obi-Wan calls him part of the Sith too. So, especially so close to the Battle of Geonosis when Dooku made that statement, it's hard to know what Dooku really is at that point. In the book Lockdown, written by Joe Schreiber, the author describes Zabrax as having 2 hearts because he had to have 2 bombs implanted into his chest to not escape from that prison because he had 2 hearts, and they always implanted a bomb next to your heart. That fact is now canon because it's mentioned in this book as Zabrax having 2 hearts, and the quote goes like this: "She forced a smile despite the burning nausea in her gut and the pounding in her 2 Zabrak hearts. Good job job, Joe Scriber. It is now canon. While the Duchess of Mandalore, Satine, is giving speeches about Mandalore's position within the Separatists versus the Republic fight, she's urging many systems to be neutral throughout this fight. There's some themes in the book that suggest, and we've also heard this in real life before, that when you choose a side, you're complicit to crimes being committed. That's kind of a position some people would take, that you feel like you got to take a side, because if you don't, then you're not fighting against the evil thing that's happening. That's kind of the same way that Obi Wan feels, because now he's conflicted about his old friend delivering this message when he feels like Mandalore needs to choose the Republic, and so does Cato Neimodia. In The Living Force, I said that we saw a very humanist side of the Jedi because of the way that they tried to revive Quinn from becoming a forgotten place, and something of nostalgia to a lot of the Jedi Council members. Public perception is still very much that the Jedi don't really care about individual people or even individual communities. They care about big picture stuff, and they also care about helping bigger entities. They just don't help the little guy, basically. Anakin and Palpatine are having a discussion during that thought about the public perception of the Jedi, and Palpatine says this, which then also prompts Anakin to think the next thought following this quote. I know the dogma, but be honest. Let's take, say, Master Windu. He is perhaps the Order's greatest warrior, most powerful Force adept, but do you really think he cares about people? Anakin thinks. Like a button pushed in his mind, Anakin saw Mace's glare, heard his condescending monotone speech, felt the air of judgment that naturally came with him. He knew the Jedi Master would do anything to complete the mission, to dedicate himself to seeing justice in the Republic, but did he care about anyone? Not. Anakin said slowly, in the same way you or I do. Sidious continues his manipulation of Anakin in this little exchange, also paints the picture that I feel like Anakin was already beginning to see, that the Jedi perception of being humanists is just disappearing. They're just too arrogant. I debated whether I was even going to bring this up because I wasn't sure if it was a topic worth sharing in this kind of content, but there is a clone trooper named Sister in this book. I urge you to look up her story and description, but there's a sentiment that she is such an anomaly of a clone trooper that it's ridiculous. I can see that argument. However, we've seen clone anomalies already. Clone Force 99, Omega is one. Because of the fact that we've seen this other times before, it's just not out of the question that an anomaly, even an extreme one, could happen. I think the real controversy is that people don't want it to happen, so they're just going to argue its ridiculousness so that they can make it disappear because they don't like it. There's plenty of things you could say that about in Star Wars. This is such a politically charged topic that it shouldn't be any different than anything else you could argue against it being included or not being included in Star Wars. I prefer just to view it as fantasy and enjoy it for what it is. If a story comes out to explain it, that's great. Anakin makes a funny claim in this book, and here's the quote. Still, it got in the joints of his mechanical hand, even when he covered it with a tight-fitting glove. The convoy away, Anakin removed the glove and tried to blow some of the grit out of his knuckles. See, he said to no one in particular, no one believes me, but it gets everywhere. He's talking about sand getting into his cybernetic hand, and he says no one believes him. Who doesn't believe you that sand gets everywhere? Who would care to not believe you, Anakin? Just being dramatic for dramatic's sake, which is totally like Darth Vader. So honestly, the inclusion of this makes sense. Mill, the Padawan that Anakin's traveling with during their trip to help Obi Wan on Cato Neimodia, comes to a realization that Anakin's a bit of a hypocrite, and the quote goes like this, but still, all those same faces and voices, all with massive rifles, and they were so obedient, talking about the clones. Anakin had revealed that he'd grown up enslaved, and now he was a Jedi commanding clones bred for war. The whole thing unnerved Mill. It's a pretty stunning realization when you think about it. He was a slave, and now he's commanding slaves that are there just to fight a war for the Republic. There's a member of the Neimoidians that Ventress is talking to that is a partner to the one Neimoidian that you see throughout the book, Roog, but he's more of a loyal member to the Neimoidians. Roog is more of a loyal but neutral force to the Neimoidians, where she wants to find truth but also can be unbiased about it. And Ventress is talking to this person, Kitar, and her manipulation is pretty strong. And here's how it goes. The evidence is damning, he said softly. Damning. That is different from certainty, isn't it? At this point, Kitar might have agreed with anything Ventress said, but her words continued their assault, chipping away at his thoughts and concerns until she led him like a youngling following a toy. The Jedi are powerful. Their ability to sway minds is unfathomable to those that don't understand their kind. Think of their order, indoctrinating children fresh out of the womb, and their parents, they simply let them leave forever. Think of what Newt Gunray said about his encounter on Naboo, the frightening speed and power. And now they suddenly transition from peacekeeper, she said with a derision, to soldiers commanding the military. Is that not concerning to you? He goes on to say that the Jedi would use any means necessary to sway people to accomplish their agendas. So it's almost kind of like she's implicating that the Jedi just convince people to hand over their children and teach them the ways of the Jedi, which we know to a point not to be true. We don't know if other Jedi go rogue and are a little more aggressive in this, kind of like Sifo Dyas, but her manipulation's pretty strong here, similar to Palpatine's. Anakin has a bit of a blind trust in the institution of the Republic, and Obi-Wan has a trust in the Republic, but not a blind trust. He's able to sift out irregularities to determine where some deception may be happening, and he shows that when he talks about Palpatine and about other officials. But you also see that in episode 2 and episode 3, how his blind trust can lead him to just ignore facts. I think that's something that Qui-Gon would have helped curve, and I think it's because of Qui-Gon's teachings that Obi-Wan is able to not not trust in it so blindly. He is able to question it a little bit more. It would just have been nice if he was able to teach Anakin the same things, so that way he was able to not be such a zealot for the Republic. Palpatine is such a strong manipulator. He speaks on behalf of the Republic as the Chancellor, and then when he's Sidious talking to Neimoidians or other separatists, he is able to convince them of some pretty hard anti-Republic feelings, which then also get passed along to their people, and he just spreads this conflict throughout the galaxy. This just goes to show you just how convincing and powerful of a Sith Lord Palpatine was, and how smart of a Sith Lord he was as well. As I mentioned before, according to Obi Wan, that business on Cato Neimodia doesn't count when it comes to how many times Anakin has saved his ass. And now we know why it doesn't count, because Obi Wan had a plan the whole time. Anakin just inserted himself in the midst of this plan. We don't know if the plan would have worked. Obi Wan seemed to think it would work. Anakin found out after the fact that he had a plan and realized, oh, maybe I didn't need to jump in, but he did, and later decides to count it as one of the times that he saved Obi Wan, which is definitely like Anakin. Padawan Mill has an ability to sense people's emotions in such a strong way that she can actually locate where they are in even a relatively lengthy proximity, and almost kind of like infrared, just seeing through walls and knowing where people are. Which, if you think about it, the Jedi can do this already. They can sense someone's force power and know about where they are, but her sensitivity to this just seems a lot stronger than we've seen in other people. Palpatine is addressing the Jedi and the members of the Jedi Council, with Anakin present as well. After this discussion, he holds Anakin back and says, hey, I just wanted to talk to you for a little bit. You want to go get a coffee? They call it a calf, but you want to go get a calf? And he says, okay. And they go to a cafe, I guess, a Star Wars cafe, to get a calf. And they start a discussion, and Anakin just says, why did you bring me here? And Palpatine's like, oh, I just wanted to catch up and find out how you're doing. And it was such an impromptu meeting, and there was not really any reason for it in the moment, except for the fact that Palpatine is trying to manipulate Anakin, but it was a very contrived meeting between the two. I wish the author would have came up with a more organic way of putting them together to have this discussion. I think Anakin definitely shares Qui-Gon's sense of morality, except for the fact that Qui-Gon would want to seek justice for the little guy and for really any party at any point, but he would try to think of a way that would not risk the life or health of the people around him, and he would be more sensible about it. He could be impulsive, but he wasn't silly or dumb, and he didn't make rash decisions that would endanger people. At least it didn't seem like it was to the extreme, but Anakin felt so strongly about his sense of justice that he was willing to kill to put forth this justice. We saw it when he killed the Sand People when they abducted his mother. So they definitely shared that same sense of morality. Anakin just took it way to the extreme. Obi-Wan comes to a realization in this book, and it's something that I feel like every Star Wars fan is thinking when Anakin finally just makes the full turn to the dark side. Quote goes like this: all it took was leaving behind the bond of master and apprentice. For a moment, Obi-Wan's mind drifted from the mission, a volley of relentless questions whipping through. Was Anakin like this because Obi-Wan tried too hard to live up to Qui-Gon's dying request? If he had been more like Qui-Gon and less like what he thought a Jedi mentor should be, would Anakin have such defiance in him? As Anakin and Padme oversaw the data upload, Obi-Wan finally identified the strange feeling in him, something so rare and foreign that it took a barrage of questions and the weight of self-doubt to recognize. Regret. We know that Obi-Wan regrets the way that he trained Anakin, and regrets the fact that he couldn't rein in Anakin's passion and his risk-taking tendencies. And now you get to see it come into his own mind that he just didn't have the ability like Qui-Gon would have had to rein that in, because I believe Qui-Gon probably would have felt naturally to do the same things that Anakin wants to do, but he is willing to find sensible ways of accomplishing that justice that Anakin sees as well, and Anakin is just too aggressive about it. Obi-Wan retains this conviction that the Jedi always exhibit bravery and purpose, and he has a quote in the book that puts forth that arrogant sense that the Jedi have from episode 2 leading up to episode 3, and also before that as well. Youngling is safe, Obi-Wan said. Shaken, they elevated the cityscape below them, becoming smaller and smaller. But safe, she's brave. She is a Jedi, Obi-Wan said, with such belief in his words, an absolute synthesis of bravery and purpose, as if it were impossible for the two to be separate, whether initiate, Padawan, or Jedi Knight. So this infallible thought that Obi-Wan has about the Jedi is also something I think that a lot of the council felt, and it really leads to their downfall, because they're just unwilling to see some traits within maybe a formerly trustworthy Jedi that would be toxic traits that might lead to some bad things. And arrogance is definitely a trait that could have done that, but they were all guilty of it, and they just refused to acknowledge it. So that puts an end to the things that I found interesting in this book. It was a good read. It didn't feel jumbled or anything. It was smooth. Characters were well defined and deep. Obi-Wan and Anakin were perfectly Obi-Wan and Anakin. I didn't feel like they were relatively out of character at all in the book. The two Neimoidians that Obi-Wan and Anakin run into a lot, Roog and Kitar, were interesting. It was a really cool, conflicting relationship there, because Kitar was more a zealot of Cato Neimodia, while Roog was loyal to Cato Neimodia and really liked the thought and the purpose of Cato Neimodia, but she also was able to think unbiasedly about how to best serve Cato Neimodia. So reading those relationships was fun to read. I'm coming up with this rating in real time. I didn't really think about it before the video, but I think I'm going to give it an 8.3. It wasn't the most exciting story. The one thing I think that I like the most about this book is that it did exactly what I said I liked in the last book review that I did before I did the review for The Acolyte, which was for The Living Force, I think. And the one thing I didn't like about that book was that it didn't expand on anything that appeared in the official episodes, while this book did exactly that. You had just one throwaway line, "A business on Cato Neimodia doesn't count," and you can create an entire story out of it. And that, I can really appreciate the need to do that, because it just creates so much depth for the movie when you give deeper context to lines that would have seemed like throwaway lines previously. I appreciate everybody that stopped by today. Don't forget to hit that like if you enjoyed the content that you saw today, and may the force be with you. Everybody have a great rest of your day. Thank you.